You don't sound sick.
Oh, I'm sick, bro. Promise. Yeah. Oh, and I got a gig.
So
And I get a gig tonight out in the
I was
cold.
just gonna,
That's gonna be great.
I was just gonna ask that. How are you possibly going to sing and play guitar if you're sick?
I'm gonna.
Dang.
I don't know, dude. Hopefully I won't pass out. That's what I'm worried about most. Like if I get too tired, but it should be all right. I'll take Coca-Cola and stuff that'll jack me up or something.
That doesn't sound like it's a strategy that's gonna work at all. But
Coca-Cola. It's more of a mental thing, right?
You get emergency.
Yeah. I don't believe in health, so I'm just kidding. I believe in sugar when I'm sick. No.
Welcome to the MMA Outsiders Podcast with Andrew Pearson and AJ Miller.
welcome to the MMA Outsiders. I am your host, Andrew Pearson, and with me today, as always, is.
Oh, AJ Herrick. Sorry. This is my screw up this time. It's all good.
Yeah. So AJ is a little bit sick today. Yeah. So he jumped onto the call anyway, and we have a special guest today. We have Nick Davenport. Nick, introduce yourself and explain what you do.
Hey everybody, how's it going? So basically what I do, I get your mind right. That's our little slogan with my company, Mind Body One. So our goal is basically to use different means to improve cognitive performance on levels such as reaction, impulse control, stress exposure. So these different means involve physical activities, some concentration type activities to get the body and the mind in one connective unit to execute performance in many fields. And most recently, MMA has been the field I've been working with the past few months.
Awesome. Yeah. So Nick is the sports psychologist who worked with Dustin Poirier prior to his most recent win over Anthony Pettis. Nick, how did you get into this?
So basically, my background is in general psychology, my undergrad. And when I graduated, I always wanted to stay in the field of sport because I'm actually a former collegiate athlete. I ran track, did long jump, triple jump, played football. So when my career ended, I wanted to stay in the sport industry. And I had no idea what sports psychology even was when I graduated. And I was kind of mad because I could have used a lot of mental conditioning and help as far as performance when I was an athlete. But hey, you live, you learn. So basically, once I finished, I went straight into a master's program for mental health, be a therapist, so I could eventually become a regular psychologist. You know, how do you feel, your problems and stuff like that. But I quickly learned it wasn't for me. So I had a classmate who had a master's in sports psychology, and I was like, what is this? And she explained to me what they do. And I'm like, I need to be in this. She trying to take me away from it because she said there's no money there. It's hard unless you start private practice and get a bunch of big name athletes. But I didn't care. I was the type, I'm a go-getter. So I was like, I want to do this. So I switched my major like the next week.
Oh, man. Well, he's basically just like out in the swamplands down there by the coast. AJ, you back?
Yeah, back.
Okay, awesome. But yeah, Dustin Poirier's fight was awesome, and he was making decisions kind of late into the fight. Kind of walk us through his cognitive conditioning work that you did with him, that you designed for him, and then and how that could have helped him kind of late into a grueling fight with Anthony Pettis.
Oh, yeah. So Dustin, first and foremost, he's an amazing athlete just outright because when I worked with many. I've worked for the NFL players and he in all other sports, and he definitely stood out just from the jump. So my first thing that him and Phil told me, he personally told me that he wanted to work on being able to be poised when it came time to execute. And you mentioned something about ego depletion and being able to work when your resources mentally and physically are low. So that's also one of our main goals at Mind Body One is, can you work hard and work efficiently when the conditions are at their worst? So almost everything me and Phil put together was putting him in a state of disadvantage while doing some of the drills. For example, I use these tools called fit lights, and this is one of the many things we used with them. And they actually help record reaction time. I do different drills for impulse control, see if you can ignore certain stimulus and react to others. So we would purposely disadvantage him, like say only use one hand, or we will put these different goggles that actually blur his vision. They're called strobe goggles, and he could barely see in one eye, and he have to do different jab combinations or block jabs with those on. And I purposely, since he was southpaw, would make him pretty much completely blind in one eye and minimal vision in the left eye. So when he was taking these jabs at a disadvantage, when he got in a real fight, it would just be second nature. Because as you saw in the fight, he took a few, even though he dominated 100%, in my opinion, he took a few shots too. And I saw that he took a shot to his right eye, and it almost was identical to the simulation that me and Phil did with him. So our goal was to get him like he was there for, you know what I'm saying? So it was unfamiliar when it happened in the actual situation.
Man, that's awesome. That's crazy. Apparently that stuff is also used by Vasyl Lomachenko.
Oh yeah, I actually looked him up, and I actually want to reach out to him in this camp because they actually do a lot of cognitive vision training, and that's the thing with my concept. I try to take it more from just the vision, because obviously your eyes is the key to everything you do. You input information through your eyes, ears too, but eyes takes in everything. So that definitely helps. But I try to take another notch by adding the thinking aspect. Not only are you taking the information, but now you have to weed it out and know what to do with it. And that's something we call working memory in the cognitive sciences. So that's something, if you can improve your working memory, you can improve pretty much any cognitive task from the base up.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when you talk about like working memory and ego depletion, you're talking about basically your ability to think, especially under duress. And some guys you see, they make decisions like lightning fast. And I think part of that is your physical abilities as an athlete, but part of it's like I regard being able to make decisions at lightning speed, as part of athleticism. It's like a factor in it. So like what you do is especially for Poirier, is like you make sure that he's able to make those decisions in a cold, calm, logical fashion, like deep into a bloody fight. And we've seen like fighters make mistakes there before too. So like Dustin Poirier, like he's always gotten into just crazy wars, and like a few years back he fought Chan Sung Jung, and that was a crazy fight. And like deep into the fight, he shot for a takedown, and that's when he got caught in a Darce choke. So I mean, like we've seen Poirier kind of deep in these scenarios before, and sometimes you make mistakes, and like you always have to be on this hair trigger to react to things your opponent's doing, and then also impose your will. Now, is Poirier naturally better at this than others? And were you able to build on that, or is that something that can be like, is that 100% malleable?
Oh, most definitely. It's like a physical skill. Yes, there's baselines of people who are just higher at it than others, but you could always improve. And with Dustin, like I said, he brought to my attention this same thing. And when he brought it to my attention, I made it a factor so he doesn't make these decisions, like you said, and they have to be lightning quick. It has to be second nature. It has to be ingrained, because when you're anticipating or you're making choices without full concentration, you're going to make the wrong choices. But that's the irony, because you don't have too much time to do that when someone's trying to knock your head off. So basically, that was our goal, to make him have to make quick, fast decisions. And with the Fit Light, that helped a lot, because we could make this tangible with data. So I tracked every time, and every week I would send him a report and say, this is how fast you were last week on average. This is how many times you were inaccurate on average. And every week it was like weightlifting. You would increase the weight. So in our case, we would decrease the amount of time he would have to make these choices or make these reactions. And that made it that much harder. And he didn't fail to execute each week. He kept getting better. And this is what I look for with any client in any sport.
Wow, that's crazy. Like he was actually getting quicker at making these decisions under duress.
Oh yeah, to give you some numbers, because I know men lie, women lie, but numbers don't lie. When he first started out with one drill, it requires quick reaction with his hands on his lap. And on my social media, I put this all over, and it caught a lot of people's attention because you could see his hands were a blur. He had to go from his lap to the top of the table, which had two lights. One was either green or red, or both green. And his goal was not to hit the red light and only hit the green lights. So to give you some numbers, he started off about 0.4 0.4, so less than half a second reaction time. And to give you some indications with the norm, I teach college students, and I do these drills with them, and they're in the 0.5 range. So he was a whole 0.100 for a second faster, which in quick speed time, that's a lot. It may not sound like a lot when you say 0.1 second, but it's a lot. So that was when he started. By the time he got ready the week before the fight, he was at a quarter of a second. That's how fast his hands were moving. And all the videos you can see, there were blurs. So it's tangible data. So it's not like we're just saying, you look faster. It's like, no, here's the numbers. You did 0.4, then you went down to 0.3, now you're at 0.25, quarter of a second. And
that's crazy.
As you know.
Oh, yeah. So I was going to say, this is already why he's tired, right? Like his heart rate's up and everything.
Oh, yeah. I failed to mention that. Yes, Phil made it a key factor to get his heart rate up above 75% on average, and he would go right into it after that. So, for example, like a proper push for about 50 yards or so, do some plyometric work, and then come to me while his heart rate's through the roof. You're tired, you're breathing heavily, you're in fight or flight mode pretty much. Your brain hates thinking in fight or flight mode. It's our physiology not to think in fight or flight mode. So that's why we try to get them able to do so, because in a fight, you're 100% in fight or flight mode.
Yeah. So, by the way, the Phil that we're talking about is Phil Daru, an American top team strength and conditioning coach. We interviewed him a couple weeks ago. You can check that episode out on the MMA Outsiders YouTube. We're hosted on MMA Mania's YouTube as well as SoundCloud. But yeah, so man, what's interesting is is you see fighters kind of build their strategy around how often they have to make decisions. So some fighters, defensive fighters, they automate a lot of their movements and decision making in a fight. The classic example that comes to mind, and this is relevant because we have a fight coming up between these two guys again, is Jose Aldo and Max Holloway. They kind of have opposite approaches. Max Holloway is like a freight train. He gets rolling, and as the fight goes on, he starts to get a read of his opponent. He just starts putting more and more combinations together, and he makes his opponents make a lot of decisions. Basically gets their brains tired, and that's when they start making mistakes. And he has really solid fundamentals, and he trusts that he will be able to execute later in the fight. Whereas someone like Jose Aldo, everything is built around having to make less decisions and slowing the pace of the fight down. So I mean, his defense is so good, his movement is so good, and he's so efficient too that it's all not just, I think, physically tired, but so he doesn't get mentally tired. And the problem with that when he fought Max Holloway is Max was able to basically push through his power, and once he had that kind of timing down, Jose Aldo did start making mistakes. In the I think it was the third round when he got knocked down, he slipped 2 punches of a 4-punch combination, but he came back up right into the second two and he got knocked down. So it's going to be really interesting to see in the rematch whether he's going to be able to either A, adjust his strategy, so he is making more decisions later into the fight, or B, whether it's going to be the same scenario again with Holloway kind of taking over later into the fight with forcing a higher rate, which is a higher pace is just more decisions made per minute. Now you see this in a number of fighters, and now some fighters, they don't break mentally, but they break physically. They still want to make those decisions, but their body won't execute anymore. And that can be improved as well. The classic example is early Amanda Nunes. She had a couple fights earlier in her career, and I mentioned her because she's an American top team athlete as well. Earlier in her career, you can tell she's still game, but her body just won't execute anymore. Now, there's other fighters, man, I don't want to name names, but there's other fighters, you can see them break mentally. And there's not necessarily, a shame in that because, anyone who's competed, if you haven't competed in a cage fight before, it's crazy, man. It is intense. Do you see, a difference, mentally between the MMA athletes you work with and the athletes from other sports?
Oh, yeah, that's a great comparison to bring up. So, yeah, what I've seen with MMA athletes is it's a different level of discipline first and foremost. When they execute, there's always a rhyme and reason to what they're doing, because with other sports, let's say like a football player, they make a movement, there's usually another factor that's going into the end of that play. Even if they blow their assignment or mess up somewhere, that play can still be executed and they can still win the game or score a touchdown. But with fighters, it's so crucial that every movement, every thought is goal directed and oriented to progress the motion of what they're doing. Because if they don't, it's one, wasted physical energy, and two, wasted mental energy that can lead to them getting in their own heads and then physically getting hurt or losing.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, exactly. And there's always that, like, you have to be on edge. Like, it takes a toll mentally to react to every little twitch your opponent makes, because if you don't, you get punched in the face, you know? Now, I want to talk a little bit about flow and, like, you know, how that plays into what you do. So, you know, back in I think it was like 1970s, a guy named Csikszentmihalyi came up with what we now know as flow theory. And he came up with it as a theory of intrinsic motivation. Basically, we do things because they're just doing it is fun, just doing it is rewarding, and so you don't need any like external motivation like money or anything like that. And what you found was, like, these activities that are rewarding are also challenging, and they come right at the balance point between your skill set and the challenge. So when it's a high challenge and you have high skill, you tend to get into what's called the flow state. You know, athletes know this as the zone. This is where anyone who's really good at anything basically will get into the state of concentration where time drops away, action blends with awareness. And this is actually a state where ego depletion seems to be suspended. If you're in flow, you can make a lot of decisions without having to like stop and think about them, because it just happens automatically because you've developed a very high level of skill. AJ experiences this every time he riffs on a guitar, and you know, it's something that's common to human experience wherever there's high skill level and a high challenge. Now, flow, because like I said, it's right at the balance between a very high challenge and skill, but it's also like on one side of flow you have what's called like arousal. So it's like anxiety or that adrenaline rush, and that's the where you have trouble making decisions because you're just, you know, it's fight or flight. And then right below flow is control, where you have your skill level is much higher than the challenge, and so you're executing, but you're not quite in the zone yet. And I think for athletes, the issue is making sure they don't spike too high. And I think what happens with athletes, well, with fighters specifically, when you get dropped into a fight, you do get an adrenaline dump, especially if it's the first time, or if it's your first time on the big stage, or you get those you know, shakes or jitters. I definitely experienced it. It's for me, when I've competed like in the ring or in the cage, it's like it's really weird. Everything feels like surreal, like it's not me. And I want to punch harder, but I feel like I can't. And so everyone handles this differently. Do you think the difference between like how in like personalities, between how personalities will handle that like stage fright or that, you know, pre-fight, like those pre-fight nerves?
That's funny you mentioned that. I actually worked with a professor at Florida Atlantic University on a research study on personality traits and mental toughness, and it's definitely a relationship. We really can extrapolate like how far the extent, but there is a relationship depending on personality types, on how you experience different anxiety, like you said, anxiety, because at the end of the day, anxiety is needed. A lot of people feel that mentally tough people are just fearless monsters who see or feel nothing bad and they just go at it 100%. No, it's just that they're able to take that anxiety or take that panic and convert it to positive energy to use towards the task at hand. Like I like to use, because flow is a great example of all this, because I use an analogy of like someone who's on a vacation somewhere. I say, if you've never been there before, you're going to see all the sights. Oh my gosh, what's that? Oh, let's go here. Let's go there. And you'll make all these quick, rash decisions just to please your instant gratification. But we want to be that person who's familiar with scenery, whatever it may be, whether it's sport, life, whatever. If you've been there before, you're gonna notice much more things. You're like, okay, I've seen this. You're gonna notice more smaller details, and that's how it should be in the fight as well. Because if you haven't been there before, like you said, you're nervous, you're in the zone, but at the same time, you're trying to do the most. And like you said, if you're high skill, you shouldn't really be reverting back to, oh, I should kick this way or I should punch this way. Because at this point, it should be like riding a bike. The more you give attention to it, the more awkward and less efficient you'll become. They call it actually paralysis by analysis. That's the fancy word for choking, basically.
Oh, I like that. Paralysis by analysis.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's basically a fancy word for choking. So you usually choke. Research shows that most people choke mostly because they're paying attention to specific details that they already should know. For example, when you ride a bike for the first time, it's usually like left foot, right foot, and you're all wobbly. So when you take yourself back to focus on these specific tasks that you've learned, you actually make yourself a beginner again. And this is why most people, not all, but most people tend to fail at things that like, wait, he's a top fighter or he's a top athlete. How did he lose this fight in that way? Because he may have got in his head and started paying attention to task irrelevant factors. Because even if it's a positive, I was telling someone this earlier, you can pay attention to positive notions because you could be whooping guys behind and like, yeah. And now you're not focusing on what you're doing now. And guess what happens? Your guard gets down and then you get hit. So the goal, like with flow and being in the zone, is just being in that moment, enjoying what's happening right here, right now, so you can execute what you came to do.
Yeah. So basically, people that have fun, that's the spot you should be in, right?
Yeah, that's the best way to look at it. Yeah. So if you're enjoying if you look at the stress as, oh my God, this is a big fight, a lot of money on the table. If I don't win this, I might get dropped from this or that. Or you can look at it as, oh, a big fight, I might lose. Nah, that's not going to happen. Let's do it. Let's bring it on. Like the same scenario, but how you interpret it is going to play into how you go into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing I was always curious about, does extroversion, like introversion, extroversion, does that relate to how you respond to stress?
What I've learned, it does, like I said, to an extent, because a person who's extroverted more than likely will go out on a limb to try something that might be out of their comfort zone, which can allow them to develop a better resilience, but not necessarily. So it can go both ways, I think personally, because you could be introverted too and be less likely to take risks. It just matters of how much, because a lot of research shows that we're all a little bit of both. Like no one's just completely outgoing extroverted, no one's completely just to themselves. It's just right. When are you at these? Because I know personally, I can go and be the laugh of the party, but at the same time, I have no problem being home by myself doing nothing. So it's just a matter of how you can turn it off and on. So I feel that an extrovert may have a better chance, but I won't say they're just outright going to be the better way of handling the pressure and stressors.
Gotcha. But like when it comes to like, well, I don't want to call it stage fright, but that kind of like those pre-fight nerves, is an extrovert going to be able to, knowing that they have to go in front of a bunch of people and do the thing that they always do in the gym? Are they gonna start the fight better? Like, are they gonna have an easier time getting into that zone?
Okay, I would agree to that notion then, yeah, because a person who's extroverted, they feed off of the attention and they, like I said, they can convert it to a positive outcome. So yeah, then I would agree in that context, definitely. An extroverted person probably is going to fare better.
Yeah, okay, that's this is the kind of stuff that interests me because Conor McGregor tells a totally different story of how he deals with the pre-fight nerves than say Donald Cerrone. Both super talented fighters. Both, I mean, when they get into the zone, man, lethal guys. And Donald Cerrone is like, it hits him really hard before the fight. And he's talked about before, he's like, I almost just like want to just spar around before I get in there, like full force, just so I get myself into that zone. And then Conor McGregor says, he gets super hyped. Right, the day before he's in promotion mode, and then like when the day of the fight comes, he's calm, like he is 100% like zen, which is a totally different story. Cerrone says he gets dropped into a fight, and again I think the problem for guys who are slow starters sometimes is that they're in the gym, they're used to coming up into flow from the control zone where they they're hitting pads. And the difficulty gradually increases, They're sparring, and they start out kind of slow, and they're able to work their way up into it. Whereas in a fight, you get dropped into it from this like, fight or flight mode, and you instantly have to kind of snap into flow. What was it? I was going to ask, does that like jive with like your experience or what you see, and like your experience, like not just as an athlete as well, like playing big games and stuff like that?
Yeah, I feel like when the pressure's on in the big games, that's basically what it all comes down to. Can you execute it when it matters? Because you talked about like before the fights or hitting the mitts and stuff, and everyone's perfect in practice, but can that transfer over, and are they going to execute the way they intended to when it comes time to? That's, I think, a big contrast with a lot of people as well, that are they able to turn it on when it matters the most?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's other things that like sports psychologists have told me they do, like stuff like injury recovery. I talked to one guy, and he said if I can talk to an athlete before they go into surgery, they recover better, they recover faster. How does that work?
Oh, that's interesting you bring it up, because I had to do that for one of my classes when I was doing my master's in sports psych, and the class was on injury and psychology. And basically, there was a research paper we had to do or study that showed that they had ACL injuries, and most people know familiar, that's one of the worst injuries any athlete or any person can get. And I forget how many people were in the sample size, but half were assigned to the positive thinking, low anxiety group, and the other half were the negative thinking, high anxiety group. So they showed that the positive thinking, low anxiety group healed 4 times faster than the group that were high anxiety, the worriers, basically. So there's a lot of relevance to that. I think what the science says behind that is because our bodies physiologically, when we stress or worry, there's actually physical hormones like cortisol that actually slow down immune system and healing process. So that's a lot of relevance to why you can actually think yourself and be more slower to heal from a physical standpoint. But from the mental standpoint, a lot of it is you're just not going to put much tension on that muscle. So therefore, recovery is going to be harder because you're going to baby it. I've experienced this as an athlete myself. I was scared to put full pressure on my body or run fast as I could because, there's always that indication like, will I pull it again? Will I break it again? So there's double sides to that, physical and mental. So yeah, your outlook will definitely affect the healing process, especially in a combat sport, where it's not if you will get hurt, just how bad will you get hurt,
Yeah, it seems like that's ubiquitous. Like every fighter, because they train so hard, right? Like it's almost impossible to completely stay injury free.
Oh my goodness, that's a good point. So since I've been in the fight world, like I said, I tell my fighters hats off because I was a football guy, baseball guy, track guy. So I played many sports, and no sport I've seen to this day puts in as much time and effort and dedication to their training process, because there are so many technical forms to work on. You could do jiu-jitsu one day, boxing the next day, wrestling another day, while still doing strength and conditioning, while still doing your prehab stuff, while still doing studying film. So you get what I'm saying? It's like so many assets that your body is just getting put through the ringer, and then you got to be expected to fully perform about 10 weeks later against a guy that's trying to destroy you. So it's asking a lot of yourself physically and mentally.
Man, yeah, that's crazy. So one thing that I find like interesting, because it turns into a double-edged sword later in a fighter's career, but you have I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but all fighters are optimists, right? Like they tend to be really optimistic people.
I agree. What I've seen so far, yes, because at the end of the day, like I said, athletes have two identities. They're a person first, or an athlete first and a person second. So that second life as a person is not even in their minds right now. They say athlete dies twice, right? So right now, that life they're worrying about is fighter life. And right now, is all or nothing. There's no in between. So they're giving it their all.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think like because of the reasons you mentioned, like injury recovery, fighters have to be positive, like optimistic people. But you see sometimes at the end of a career that can turn into, a weapon against them, where they don't want to quit. I guess from a psychology perspective and from an athletic perspective, you just said they die twice. What keeps a fighter like say a guy like Diego Sanchez, who isn't going to challenge for a title, and their legendary chin is gone, their ability to take a punch, but they're not going to walk away. And this is not just him. This is pretty much across the fight game. Almost no one walks away on their own terms. And I think it's because of the optimism. You beat someone, you feel like, hey, I've got more in the tank. Whereas if you lose to someone, you're like, oh, I don't want to go out like that, man. I can win the next one. But I guess is it just the fact that they think that, or is it how much they love what they do? Why is it so difficult for MMA fighters to walk away?
I think
for athletes to quit.
Yeah, I think it's a multitude of things that you just said, but like you said, it's the identity of who they are. I actually wrote an article a few years back on athletic identity for college athletes. I'm gonna call it superhero student athletes, because basically you have a reputation first and foremost. You said, I'm not going out a loser. I'm 27 and 4, so I haven't felt lost too much, and people remember me as a winner. So I want to go out as such. But like you said, when you get to the point that you're not as quick as you used to be, or you're not as strong as you used to be, or you're not taking hits as good as you used to, something's got to give. And in sports like, say, football or basketball, you can compensate with a quarterback who's not as strong as an arm as he used to be. He can be more accurate. Or a basketball player who can't jump like he used to, he can be a better shooter. But with fighting, it's everything has to be on the same cylinder. So I feel them walking away is a lot of identity more so, because physically they're usually there. And yeah, things do deteriorate, but walking away is hard because that's who they've been. That's their personality.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting too, because another one of the things I study was obsessive and harmonious passion. An obsessive passion is this it becomes a part of your identity, but not it's not smoothly integrated. Where you'll go running in the middle of a snowdrift or in bad traffic, you know what I mean? Because you tell yourself, hey, no, I love running, I got to do this. Whereas harmonious passion, it's a part of you, but it's not it's not interfering with other aspects of your life. Now, harmonious passion is more highly associated with good performance, with flow, with things like that. And they're also correlated with each other. So there's always a blend, I think. You can be obsessive and also have just healthy harmonious passion or something. But in terms of fighters, the amount, and athletes too, the amount you put on yourself in terms of this identity, the weight that you place on your ability to do the thing that you do in a sport, sometimes that can be hurtful, right?
Oh, most definitely. That same study I mentioned earlier with my professor, we actually looked at athletic identity too, and it shows that you need a high level to be successful. Like you said, there's a trade-off. You can be harmonious passion and say, I will do what it takes to win or be the best, but not at the expense of who I am. And the ones who seem to find that balance, you can look at just any sportscaster. Most of the great athletes, they usually become sportscaster because they know I can give up now, but I have another side of life. And the ones you see who go bankrupt or the ones who just fall off the earth are the ones who had to win by all costs. They either cheated or they just didn't. They cut off family members. So you have to have that balance, so you can still have a life. Because let's be real, a veteran in most sports, especially like fighting, you're talking about 35, 36, 37. In real life, that's still considered a young man,
Yeah.
So it's hard to deal with in the eyes of the world. You're a young man, but eyes of your sport, which has been your life for 15, 20 years, you're old, and that's probably hard hit on your ego as a person, let alone a fighter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Matt Brown's another one that he's talked about retiring, but he felt so good in training camp, and then he got this huge knockout.
I saw that.
Yeah, so he's kind of walking it back a little bit because he doesn't want to you want to stop fighting if you enjoy the process, you enjoy everything about it. But he talked specifically before about how he was like, he had gone like 3 or 4 losses in a row, and the UFC actually cut him. They said, they told him he was done, and they brought him back. And like he was at that point where he's like, I might have to do something else with my life, and he's putting all this pressure on himself to perform, and it just wasn't happening. And he's like, you know what? Like when he got to his lowest point, he looked around and he's like, wait a second, I could do other things. Like he started like a workout company, like building like workout equipment and stuff like that. And he realized, hey, I could do other things. Like I don't have to do this. I don't have to perform like to feed my family. And when that like basically that freedom hit him, that's when he went on that like crazy win streak, you know, like won like 7 in a row. I mean, straight from the bottom of the welterweight division right up to the top. It was just, so it's the sense of like, for Matt Brown, the sense of like, I do it because I love it. But I could do other things. Like this is not all I am, in other words.
Yeah, that clarity is definitely what because it takes that weight off now. Because like you said, a lot of people see it as feed your family. I've seen this in multiple sports, and I understand it. You know, you want to make the best for your family, your children, whoever is in your life. But at the same time, you got to make sure you're good. Because if you're not good, and this is just going to classic old school psychology, if you're not good, how can you help anyone else? You know. So he made sure that his self was okay, and then things started falling into place because now he's not overthinking things when he's worried about being everything for everyone, and now he can do what he needs to do. Yeah,
and I mean, on a related note, like Cub Swanson said recently when he fought Holloway the first time, which was his last loss, he wasn't working with a sports psychologist, and he started since, and he said he's carrying too much with him into the cage. And you know, how often does that happen? How often do fighters like carry like real life trauma and like stuff that just trauma and drama, stuff like it's going on outside the cage, into the cage, and like, do you often see that affect their performance?
Oh yeah, that's inevitable. I think it's impossible to avoid because as a human, this is a part of our holistic being. Like we can try our best to exclude it, but you can't get away from your thoughts. It just comes down to how are you at managing them, I believe, because you can tell when someone lets the emotional from outside because they don't look like themselves. They don't move as efficiently, or they do things that are a little out of character. They might be overly aggressive because of it. You know, it's projecting on whatever's going on elsewhere, whether it be rumors of such and such happening in their career or something that no one knows about and only them. So that definitely is a big factor, carrying it outside stressors and anxiety and worries into your performance.
Yeah. So I mean, like, there's the sense where you want to be the light side of the force, right? Like you want to be zen, you want to be calm, but you also like you do want to carry that some fire like into a fight. Like the flip side is someone like former UFC heavyweight, I can't remember his name. He was in the Ultimate Fighter. AJ, who was the guy who jacked off in the Ultimate Fighter?
Oh, I have no idea.
Oh man, I figured you would know that if anyone.
Hey man.
He came back. He lost like a super lopsided decision to Patrick Cummins, and then like he retired. I'll have to look it up.
Was he? I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name.
I'll look it up real quick. But
Kingsbury.
But basically, no. What was that? Kyle Kingsbury. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. Kyle Kingsbury. So he said the opposite. He said that like he went on a 2-year hiatus from MMA where he just did like peyote and like did mushrooms, and basically like he said all the anger that I felt in my life basically I got rid of it. And he said when he came back to the cage, he didn't have that like that chip on his shoulder anymore that he needed. And like he retired after that. He's like, I wanted to see if I could fight without all that anger, and he's like, I couldn't do it. So for me, it's interesting that like you don't want to put pressure on yourself, but you also want to have like talk about like the light side of the force versus the dark side. Like you need a balance. Like if there's no I guess if there's no anger, I guess if you can't come into a fight with like a chip on your shoulders to an extent, for some people, I guess that takes away their ability to fight at all. Like how many fighters do you think, like, fighters are typically pretty nice people, but when of course when you're locked in a cage, like this is the interesting thing about fighters. Like they all seem like super nice guys, well, most of them, but you lock them in a cage, they turn into just these ferocious like animals. You know what I mean? Do you think that comes from some like deep seated anger, or is it just natural aggression, or just love of fighting? Like what is with this like Jekyll and Hyde thing?
Oh yeah, what I've noticed being around these fighters this much now, because I'm like submerged and I feel super safe being there too. It's like, hey, you want to mess with me? I'm fighting with people who are lethal killing machines. But yeah, I noticed that they're very nice, well-spoken people. But until you lock them in that cage, and I think very few of what I've seen, because I've been around top team for a while, so I've seen some of the top guys, and most of them seem like it's not an aggression thing. Yeah, it's a small chip, because it goes back to what you say about arousal. Like, you have to be to the point that you're hyped up and amped, but you can't be overhyped. Like, you know, that guy who's in the gym doing his workout, screaming to the top of his lungs, and then he gets to the squat rack and falls. But you also can't be on the other side of that spectrum, and you're timid, just sitting there quiet either. Like, I use Dustin, for example. He's not a loudmouth trash talker, but he's not going to sit there and let you just say whatever either. You know, he made it known after the fight who he wants next. So it's like, you got, like you said, you got to have that Jekyll and Hyde. You got to know when to. I'm not sure if you're a fan of Dragon Ball Z. That used to be one of my favorite cartoons back in the day. You got to be like kind of like Goku. Like he was a guy that he would be a gentle giant, but when it came down to business, he would turn it up, and then he would just handle business and take care of everything. And that's what these guys, the ones I've seen doing pretty well right now, is the ones who can balance that the best, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think I think also, like, that's what gives a lot of these fights meaning. Like, if you got stuff going on kind of outside the cage in your life, and you're able to just go in there and channel all of that in a healthy way and come out with a win. Like, I think those are the fights that people look back on and they're like, man, that like meant something to me beyond just a fight. Actually, it's funny you bring up Dragon Ball Z, because I was thinking about this beforehand. Like, there's like it's a trope that, like, you know, in even in like superhero movies where they'll channel their grief or their anger or their, you know, like the long ass backstory they have into this one moment, and that's what gives it, like, that's what gives the fight meaning. And I think it's the same in real life. Like, I think in that way, like, you know, fiction mirrors reality, where you have to be able to, you know, take that and like put that into a moment that can become cathartic if you come out with the win. What was I gonna say? So there's like there's the pre-fight rituals that fighters go through, and those kind of, I feel like in many cases those serve to unlock that, like, that other fighter, you know, that other person, that, like, that identity as a fighter, and get them in the zone, basically, where they're able to, you know, channel that into, like, you know, into a fight. Do you see, like, differences between the pre-fight rituals, between, like, different personality types, and, like, how important are those, in your opinion, like, to a fighter performing? Because not just fighters, like, athletes in all sports kind of have their pre-fight habits and rituals.
Oh yeah, there's actually a fine line. A lot of people talk about rituals versus routines, and a lot of the studies and just apply, like, general, just watching people. You're repetitive in the routine, like, what gets you hyped, what gets you amped for the occasion. Because if you're not doing something in a consistent manner, how do you know it's going to work the next time? You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like saying, I'm going to try this. Oh, I won. Let me try something else. Not so good. You got to be consistent. So whatever it may be, whether it's doing some quick drills to just get your body warmed up, or you meditating in a corner, or you watching a repeat of your favorite fight of the past, whatever it may be. It should be something that, like you said, activates that inner, like in a fighter's case, monster, but gets you to the point that it's not overindulging, and then you make dumb choices, but at the point that you can re-trigger the same thing that consistently got you to the zone you need to be every time.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's that I think that's something that comes up a lot. And you mentioned this at the beginning, like it shouldn't be unfamiliar. When you do this, it shouldn't be the first time you've done this. Like with Dustin Poirier, like deep in this fight, and he gets his eye poked, and that's exactly what that loss of vision has happened to him in your drills. So like there's this sense like if you're gonna be good at something, it should be your 100th time. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So like how much of sports psychology is just that, like getting fighters mentally into the same spots they would be in a fight, or athletes into the same zone they would be in a game.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the sports site, that you can do things so many times without actually doing them. For example, Kobe Bryant, he's a big proponent of visualization. And that's just basically simply imagine yourself in a situation, because the beauty of that is you can put the situation any way you want it to be. Now, this is to say, imagine yourself just pummeling somebody to oblivion every single time. No, try to simulate things that may happen. Like when I used to do it when I was an athlete still, then this is before I even knew what sports psychology was, mind you, I would see myself in the best case scenario, average case scenario, and the worst case scenario over and over again, because if I see it in my brain, like just get the science of it, your brain doesn't know the difference between real life and imagination, because you have a nightmare, a weird dream, your body wakes up with your heart pumping and it's like, wait, why you're out of breath? You know what I mean? You ever had that happen? And it's
yeah.
Because in the dream you were getting chased by a man with a machete, but in real life there was no one there, but your body did not know that. So we make ourselves appear these visions in our head, and a lot of people take this as some fantastical magic. It's like, no, this is real hard science, that your body has been there before and it sees it over and over, because you can simulate a fight 100 times in your head. Try fighting 100 times in a day. You can tell me that that's not going to happen. So you're able to do things that physically cannot happen repetitively, whether it's simulating the punches you throw or an attack on you, or just simulating how you feel. You can even envision yourself in the champion, the winner's circle, getting your arm held up, because that helps with confidence, because you want to see good outcomes. And that's the sad part. Some people do the opposite and they see just the bad outcomes. What if I lose? What if I get hit this way? What if I get defeated? So that's the power of the mind, and that doesn't take any. You don't have to have a degree in that to use your imagination. That's something when we're 6 years old.
Yeah. Like it makes a lot of sense to envision like positive outcomes, or like even tough outcomes, and like you overcoming them. What do you think about a fighter like Nate Diaz, who said that in his mind he envisions the worst possible scenario, right? Him getting knocked out in front of like all his family, all his friends, and then he just accepts that. Decides, yeah, that'll probably be what's going to happen. And then he goes into that fight. He goes into his fight super pissed off, man. But he goes into the fight like just assuming the worst is going to happen, and then like accepting that and working from there. Like, what do you think of that approach?
Actually, I'm a big proponent of that approach. I've seen a lot of his interviews, and he's you can tell his head's on his shoulders. Like when he envisions that negative outcome, it's good, because like, let's not even go from the pro standpoint. Let's go to like little league sports and stuff. What's the worst thing usually happens when a team loses? These kids start crying because they had the anticipation that they were just going to keep winning. And then winning is the only thing there is there. So when you get yourself prepped for the worst, it's like I said, you've been there before. And I know this is what it feels like, or this is what it seems like in that state. So my body and my brain is programmed to say, if this goes haywire, I can still react, because I knew how this felt in my mind before it even happened. Versus someone who's like, yeah, I'm gonna have a great fight, which you still should have that outlook of having a great fight, but you just think it's gonna be peaches and cream, and then all of a sudden, what did Mike Tyson say? I think it's probably one of the most famous fight quotes. You have a plan to get punched in the mouth. And I'm not a fighter, at least professionally, but I've been a few, back in my college days, so I learned the hard way. It's all dandy until you get hit in the face, and I'm like, okay, what do I do now? And I think Nate Diaz's outlook is an amazing one that I think more people should adopt, because it gives you that benefit of saying, I've seen the worst, I've been there, now let's see what we can do now, versus let's hope for the best. You know what I mean? Because best may not happen. Rarely does in any situation.
Yeah, that's always true. Almost always true of a fight. But awesome, man. Nick. Thanks for talking to us. I really appreciate the insight. Let the people know where they can find you.
Oh yeah, so on social media, you can follow me on my personal page. It's at Mr. Mental Muscle. That's on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and my company, Mind Body One. You can find that on the Mind Body One, also on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We can get updates on what we're doing with the fighters and our other aspects. We also work with different populations of sports, different population of just life, and show you how to use different cognitive drills to perform better.
Awesome, man. So yeah, everyone check that out, Mind Body One, and you can find me on Twitter at Vorpality, VORPALITY, and AJ, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter, AJ Herrick, all lowercase, AJAYHERRICK. You can also find me on Facebook, and if you're real daring, find me on Instagram, same handle. AJAYHERRICK.
Awesome. And thank you for tuning in to this edition of the MMA Outsiders. And we will see you all next time.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.